Caleb hit send on the resignation email at 3:14 in the morning. 2 words: I quit. The encryption key to the company's entire security vault, a 12-digit code combining his wedding date and the day his wife died, stayed locked in his head. 3 hours later, Serafina Drake, the coldest CEO in the city, stood on his doorstep, soaking wet from the rain, demanding he save her billion-dollar merger. Behind him, his 6-year-old daughter was burning with fever, barely conscious. Save the system, and Lily might not make it. Walk away, and thousands lose everything. What would you choose? 48 hours before everything collapsed, Caleb's life looked like a machine running on fumes. He worked as the lead systems architect at Vance Technologies, the kind of role that sounded impressive on paper, but felt like a slow suffocation in practice. Every critical server, every encryption protocol, every firewall stood or fell based on his decisions. The company trusted him with everything except the one thing he actually needed: time. His apartment was small, tucked into a quiet corner of the city, where the rent was almost reasonable, and the neighbors minded their own business. The walls were thin enough that he could hear Mrs. Patterson's television through the ceiling, but thick enough that no one heard Lily crying at 2 in the morning. That was the trade-off: privacy for proximity, silence for survival. Lily had just turned 6 3 months ago. She had her mother's eyes, wide, dark, always watching, and her mother's immune system, which meant she caught every virus that floated through her kindergarten classroom. The doctors called it frequent childhood illness and told Caleb not to worry. But Caleb worried anyway, because worrying was all he had left after Elena died. 2 years ago, an aneurysm took her in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. No warning, no goodbye, just a phone call from the hospital and a world that stopped making sense. He kept Elena's photo on his nightstand, next to the digital clock that blinked through the hours he should have been sleeping. Some nights, he talked to her. Not out loud, that felt too crazy, but in his head, running through the day's disasters like she could still hear him. Lily wouldn't eat her vegetables again. The merger is killing me. I don't know how much longer I can do this alone. The merger. That was the word that had consumed the last 8 months of his life. Vance Technologies was acquiring a European competitor in a deal worth over $2 billion. The integration required merging 2 completely different security infrastructures, and Caleb was the only person who understood both systems well enough to make them talk to each other. His boss called it mission critical. His CEO called it non-negotiable. Caleb called it the reason he had missed Lily's school play, her parent-teacher conference, and 3 of her birthday party planning sessions. Serafina Drake was the kind of CEO who made headlines. 39 years old, self-made, and ruthless in ways that business magazines described as visionary, and employees described as terrifying. She had built Vance from a struggling startup into a tech giant through sheer force of will, and she expected everyone around her to match her intensity. Lunch breaks were weaknesses. Sick days were excuses. Family emergencies were inconveniences to be scheduled around, not accommodated. Caleb had seen her fire a senior director for leaving early to attend his daughter's graduation. The official reason was performance issues, but everyone knew the truth. In Serafina's world, the company came first. Always. No exceptions. He had learned to survive by becoming invisible. Head down, work done, mouth shut. He answered every late-night email, joined every weekend call, and never once complained about the 14-hour days that left him too exhausted to read Lily her bedtime story. He told himself it was temporary, just until the merger closed, just until things settled down, just until he could finally breathe. But temporary had stretched into permanent, and breathing had become a luxury he could no longer afford. The bags under his eyes had bags of their own. His coffee intake had doubled, then tripled. He couldn't remember the last time he had eaten a meal that didn't come from a microwave or a delivery app. And Lily, sweet, patient Lily, had stopped asking when Daddy would come home early, because she already knew the answer. The night everything changed started like every other night. Caleb was hunched over his laptop at the kitchen table, debugging an authentication conflict that had been haunting him for 3 days. Lily was asleep in her room, or so he thought. The clock on the wall read 11:47. The merger deadline was 72 hours away. The first cough came at midnight. Caleb barely registered it, too focused on the lines of code swimming across his screen. The second cough was sharper, wetter, followed by a small voice calling from the hallway. "Daddy?" He found Lily standing in her doorway, clutching her stuffed rabbit, her face flushed red even in the dim light. When he touched her forehead, the heat hit him like a warning. She was burning up. The thermometer confirmed what his hand already knew, 103.4 degrees. He gave her children's fever reducer and tucked her back into bed, promising to check on her every hour. She fell asleep holding his hand, her small fingers wrapped around his thumb like she was afraid he would disappear. He stayed longer than he should have, watching her breathe, counting the seconds between each exhale. When he finally returned to his laptop, 45 minutes had vanished and his inbox had exploded. 17 new emails, all marked urgent, all from the same sender, S. Drake. The first email was curt. "Authentication bridge failing. Need encryption key. Call me." The second was shorter. "Where are you?" The third abandoned professionalism entirely. "Caleb. Now." His phone started buzzing before he could finish reading. Serafina's name flashed across the screen like a threat. He let it ring. She called again. And again. By the fourth call, the buzzing had become its own kind of violence, each vibration a reminder that he belonged to someone else's emergency. He answered on the fifth ring. Serafina's voice was ice. "The entire authentication system is locked. I need the master encryption key in the next 30 minutes, or this merger is dead." Caleb explained about Lily, the fever, the medication, the need to monitor her through the night. He asked for 2 hours, maybe 3, just enough time to make sure his daughter was stable. Serafina's response came without hesitation. "Hire a babysitter. This is a $2 billion deal, Caleb. Your daughter has a cold." Something cracked inside him, not loudly, not dramatically, but with the quiet finality of a bone that had been stressed too many times. He thought about all the nights he had sacrificed, all the moments he had missed, all the times he had chosen the company over the only person who actually needed him. And for what? For a woman who couldn't tell the difference between a cold and a 103-degree fever. For a company that would replace him within a week if he dropped dead at his desk. He thought about Elena, about the last conversation they never had, about how he had been in a meeting when she collapsed, too busy to answer her final call. The voicemail she left. "Hey, just calling to say I love you. Call me back when you can." Still lived on his phone, a ghost he couldn't delete. Lily coughed again from her bedroom. The sound cut through the silence like a verdict. "Caleb, are you still there?" Serafina's voice was sharp, impatient. He looked at his laptop, at the emails piling up like accusations, at the phone in his hand, connecting him to a world that had taken everything and given nothing back. Then he looked at Lily's door, cracked open just enough that he could see the glow of her nightlight. The choice, in the end, wasn't really a choice at all. "I'll send you something," he said. Then he hung up. He sat down at his laptop and opened a new email. The recipient field auto-filled with the company's HR distribution list. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a clarity he hadn't felt in months. The subject line was simple. Effective immediately. The body was simpler. "I quit." He hit send at 3:14 in the morning. Then he turned off his phone, closed his laptop, and walked into Lily's room. She was still sleeping, still burning, still holding her rabbit like it could protect her from the world. He pulled a chair next to her bed and sat down. For the first time in 2 years, he chose to stay. The rain started around 5 in the morning, a sudden downpour that hammered against the windows like an argument. Caleb dozed in the chair next to Lily's bed, waking every 30 minutes to check her temperature. It had dropped slightly, 101.8, but not enough to let him relax. He made her drink water, wiped her forehead with a cool cloth, and whispered promises he hoped he could keep. By 6:15, he had almost convinced himself that he had made the right decision. The world outside could burn. The merger could collapse. Serafina Drake could find another engineer to sacrifice on the altar of corporate ambition. None of it mattered as much as the small hand reaching for his in the gray morning light. Then the doorbell rang. He ignored it. Probably a delivery driver with the wrong address, or a neighbor complaining about something trivial. But the bell rang again, longer this time, followed by a knock that rattled the door in its frame. When he looked through the peephole, his stomach dropped. Serafina Drake stood on his doorstep, soaking wet, her designer coat plastered to her shoulders like a second skin. Her hair, usually immaculate, hung in dark streaks around her face. She looked nothing like the woman who commanded boardrooms and crushed competitors. She looked almost human. Caleb opened the door, but blocked the entrance with his body. "How do you know where I live?" "HR records." Her voice was hoarse, stripped of its usual authority. "I need the encryption key, Caleb, the one you created, the one only you know." He shook his head. "I quit. You got my email. I don't accept your resignation." "That's not how it works." Serafina stepped closer, water dripping from her sleeves onto the welcome mat Elena had picked out years ago. 1,500 employees. That's how many people lose their jobs if this merger fails. That's how many families get destroyed because you decided to throw a tantrum at 3 in the morning. The accusation hit harder than he expected. He had spent so long being invisible, being compliant, being the good soldier who never questioned orders. But the soldier was gone now, replaced by something rawer, something that had spent 2 years learning to live with loss. "My daughter is sick," he said. "Really sick. Not hire a babysitter sick. And I have spent the last 2 years giving everything to your company while my kid grew up without a father. So don't stand on my doorstep and lecture me about destroyed families." Something flickered across Serafina's face. Not guilt. He doubted she was capable of guilt, but something adjacent to it. Recognition, maybe. Or calculation. With her, it was impossible to tell. "Let me in," she said. 5 minutes. That's all I'm asking." Before he could respond, a sound came from behind him. Small feet padding across hardwood. A weak voice calling, "Daddy?" He turned to find Lily standing in the hallway, swaying slightly, her face pale, except for 2 bright spots of fever on her cheeks. She took 1 step forward, then another, and then her eyes rolled back and her knees buckled and she was falling. Falling! Caleb caught her before she hit the ground. She was limp in his arms, lighter than she should have been, burning with a heat that frightened him more than any corporate crisis ever could. He called her name, shook her gently, pressed his ear to her chest to make sure she was still breathing. When he looked up, Serafina was already inside, her phone in her hand, dialing a number with the efficiency of someone who had never encountered a problem she couldn't solve. "I'm calling my personal physician," she said. "He can be here in 15 minutes. Faster if I tell him it's an emergency." Caleb wanted to refuse, wanted to tell her to get out of his house, out of his life, away from the only person who mattered. But Lily was unconscious in his arms, and the nearest hospital was 30 minutes away, and pride was a luxury he could no longer afford. Fine, he heard himself say. But when this is over, you leave. Both of you leave. Serafina didn't answer. She was already giving orders into the phone, commanding the world to bend to her will. Some things, it seemed, never changed. The physician arrived in 12 minutes. Dr. Marcus Webb was a silver-haired man with steady hands and the kind of calm that only came from decades of experience. He examined Lily while Caleb hovered nearby, watching every movement like a hawk tracking prey. The diagnosis was a severe viral infection complicated by dehydration. She needed fluids, rest, and close monitoring. If her fever spiked again, she would need to go to the hospital. While Dr. Webb set up an IV drip in Lily's bedroom, Serafina cornered Caleb in the kitchen. Her wet coat hung over a chair, dripping onto the linoleum. She looked smaller without it, almost fragile, though Caleb knew better than to trust appearances. The encryption key, she said. I need it now. He shook his head. I told you. I'm done. The system is locked, Caleb. Completely locked. No one can access anything. Not the servers, not the databases, not even the email archive. The board meeting is in 8 hours. If we can't demonstrate system integrity by then, the merger collapses and the stock price goes with it. Caleb walked to the counter and poured himself a glass of water. His hands were shaking, though whether from exhaustion or anger, he couldn't tell. The master key is a 12-digit code. I created it 2 years ago, right after Elena died. It's the date we got married, combined with the date she passed. I'm the only one who knows it. He gave her the numbers. Serafina typed them into her phone and forwarded them to someone at the office. For 30 seconds, they waited in silence. Then her phone buzzed with a response, and her expression shifted from impatience to something closer to fear. It's not working, she said. The system is rejecting the key. Caleb took her phone and read the message himself. Access denied. Invalid credentials. 3 attempts remaining before permanent lockout. The words didn't make sense. He had created that password himself, tested it 100 times, never shared it with anyone. It should have worked. Someone changed it, he said slowly. Someone with admin access went into the system and changed my encryption key. Serafina's eyes narrowed. That's impossible. You're the only one with that level of access. Apparently not. His own phone started vibrating on the counter. The phone he had turned off hours ago, now somehow alive again. He picked it up and saw a flood of notifications cascading across the screen. Missed calls, voicemails, text messages, emails, all from the same cluster of numbers and addresses, all marked urgent, all demanding answers he didn't have. The company was in chaos. The authentication failure had triggered a cascade of secondary lockouts, freezing everything from payroll systems to client databases. The board members were panicking. The merger partners were threatening to pull out. The stock price had dropped 11% in pre-market trading and was still falling. Caleb scrolled through the messages, his exhaustion giving way to a cold clarity. This wasn't an accident. Someone had deliberately sabotaged the system, using his credentials as cover. Someone who wanted the merger to fail. Someone who wanted him to take the blame. I need to get to the office, he said. Serafina shook her head. You said you quit. I said I quit working for you. I didn't say I was going to let someone frame me for corporate sabotage. From the bedroom, Dr. Webb called out that Lily was stable for now. Her fever had dropped to 100.2, and the IV fluids were helping. She would sleep for a few hours, maybe more. The danger wasn't over, but it wasn't immediate either. Caleb looked at his daughter through the open doorway. She looked so small in her bed, so vulnerable, surrounded by medical equipment that didn't belong in a child's room. He had promised himself he would choose her. He had promised himself the company didn't matter anymore. But if someone was setting him up, if his reputation, his career, maybe even his freedom was on the line, then staying home wouldn't protect her. It would just give his enemies more time to bury him. They never made it to the office. Halfway through loading Caleb's laptop into Serafina's car, Lily's monitor started beeping. The fever had spiked again, 104.1 this time, and Dr. Webb's calm finally cracked. He told them to get her to the hospital immediately. No more waiting. No more home remedies. This was serious. Serafina made a single phone call. Within minutes, they were bypassing the emergency room entirely, escorted through a private entrance to a pediatric ward that Caleb didn't even know existed. Money and power opened doors that regular people didn't know were closed. He hated it. He was also grateful for it. Lily was semi-conscious by the time they got her into a bed. She kept calling for her mother, for Elena, reaching for someone who had been gone for 2 years. Caleb held her hand and whispered lies about how everything would be okay, how Mommy was watching over her, how she just needed to rest and get better. The lies tasted like ash in his mouth. While the doctors ran tests and adjusted medications, Serafina set up a makeshift command center in the hospital waiting room. Her laptop glowed on a plastic chair. Her phone never stopped ringing. She answered every call with the same clipped efficiency, issuing orders, demanding updates, refusing to accept failure as an option. Caleb watched her work, and for the first time, he saw something other than coldness. He saw desperation. Whatever was happening at Vance Technologies, it was bigger than a failed merger. It was existential. "Show me the system logs," he said, sitting down next to her. "If someone changed my encryption key, there has to be a trail." She handed him the laptop without argument. For the next hour, he dove into the architecture he had built, tracing access patterns and authentication records. What he found made his blood run cold. 3 weeks ago, someone had created a shadow admin account using a back door he thought he had sealed years ago. The account had been used to access the master encryption vault, modify the key parameters, and install a monitoring script that tracked every login attempt. Whoever did this wasn't just trying to lock him out. They were watching, waiting, collecting evidence. "This is sabotage," he said. "Professional, deliberate sabotage. Someone spent weeks planning this." Serafina leaned over his shoulder, close enough that he could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that seemed wildly out of place in a hospital waiting room. Who has the skills to do this? Caleb thought about the question. The list was short. Very short. Only a handful of people at Vance had the technical knowledge to exploit that particular vulnerability, and most of them reported directly to him. "Arthur Brennan," he said finally. "He's the only one besides me who worked on the original security architecture. He knows where all the bodies are buried." Arthur was the company's chief financial officer, a smooth-talking Harvard graduate who had joined Vance 3 years ago. Before switching to finance, he had spent a decade as a software engineer, which explained how he knew the system's vulnerabilities. He and Serafina had clashed repeatedly over strategy and spending, but she had kept him around because he was good at his job. Too good, maybe. Serafina's expression hardened. "Arthur has been pushing for a leadership change. He thinks I'm too aggressive, too risky. He's been building alliances on the board for months." The pieces started falling into place. A failed merger would tank the stock price, erode confidence in Serafina's leadership, and create the perfect opportunity for a boardroom coup. Arthur didn't need to destroy the company. He just needed to wound it badly enough that the board would blame Serafina and hand him the keys. "We need proof," Caleb said. "Something concrete that ties him to the sabotage." Before Serafina could respond, a nurse appeared in the doorway. Her face was carefully neutral, the way medical professionals looked when they had news that could go either way. "Mr. Caleb, your daughter is asking for you. The fever is responding to treatment, but she's scared. She wants her father." Caleb looked at the laptop, at the trail of evidence that could save his career and expose a conspiracy. Then he looked at the hallway leading to Lily's room, where a 6-year-old girl was fighting a battle she didn't understand. He closed the laptop and stood up. The conspiracy could wait. His daughter couldn't. Lily fell asleep around noon, her small hand wrapped around Caleb's finger like a lifeline. The doctor said her fever had stabilized at 99.8, still elevated, but no longer dangerous. She would need to stay overnight for observation, maybe longer if complications developed. But for now, she was safe. Caleb returned to the waiting room to find Serafina staring at her laptop screen with an expression he had never seen before. Fear. Real, unguarded fear. "What?" he asked. She turned the screen toward him. "Arthur planted a logic bomb in the system. If anyone enters the wrong encryption key 3 more times, it triggers a complete data wipe. Every line of source code, every patent filing, every piece of intellectual property we own, gone. Permanently." Caleb felt the blood drain from his face. The source code alone was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. It represented years of development, thousands of engineering hours, the entire technological foundation of the company. Losing it would be catastrophic, not just for the merger, but for Vance Technologies itself. "How do we stop it?" he asked. "There's a root override," Serafina said. "A failsafe I installed when we first built the system. It requires biometric authentication. My fingerprint, my retinal scan, and a voice confirmation. But it can only be triggered from the main server room at headquarters." "Then let's go." She shook her head. "It's not that simple. The override also requires dual authorization. 2 senior executives, both present, both authenticated. I designed it that way specifically to prevent hostile takeovers." "So who's the second executive?" The silence told him everything. "Arthur." The second authorization was supposed to come from the CFO, the man who was currently trying to destroy the company from the inside. Caleb ran his hands through his hair, trying to think through the exhaustion that had settled into his bones like cement. There had to be another way, a back door, a workaround, something he had overlooked. "When I built the original system," he said slowly, "I created an emergency access protocol. It bypasses the dual authorization requirement, but it needs a physical security key, a hardware token that I kept in my office safe." Serafina's eyes lit up. "Is it still there?" "It should be, unless Arthur found it and destroyed it." The hospital waiting room suddenly felt very small, the walls pressing in from all sides. They were trapped between a logic bomb and a coup, between a sick daughter and a sabotaged company, between trust and survival. And the only way forward required them to work together. 2 people who had spent years treating each other as obstacles rather than allies. Serafina stood up and grabbed her coat. "I'll go to the office. You stay here with Lily." "No." Caleb's voice was harder than he intended. "I'm the only one who knows the safe combination, and I don't trust anyone else to do this right. Your daughter needs you. My daughter needs me to not go to prison for corporate sabotage. If Arthur succeeds, I'm the one holding the bag. My credentials, my encryption key, my access logs. He's been setting me up for weeks, and if I don't stop him, Lily grows up with a father behind bars." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implications neither wanted to examine too closely. Serafina studied his face for a long moment, looking for something. Weakness, maybe, or deception. Whatever she found seemed to satisfy her. "Fine," she said. "But we do this together. No secrets, no side deals, no protecting your own interests at the expense of the company." Caleb met her gaze without flinching. "I could say the same to you." They left Lily in the care of Dr. Webb, who promised to call immediately if anything changed. The drive to Vance headquarters took 23 minutes through afternoon traffic, long enough for Caleb to wonder if he was making the biggest mistake of his life. He had chosen his daughter over the company just hours ago. Now he was choosing the company again, telling himself it was for Lily's sake, telling himself there was no other way. The lies were getting easier. That scared him more than anything. The security key was still in Caleb's safe, hidden behind a false panel that only he knew existed. He retrieved it while Serafina kept watch at the door, her phone buzzing with increasingly frantic messages from board members and investors. The device was small, about the size of a USB drive, but it held the power to bypass every security protocol Arthur had corrupted. They made it to the server room without incident. Serafina's biometric scan unlocked the outer door. Caleb's key activated the emergency override console. For 10 minutes, they worked side by side, dismantling the logic bomb line by line, restoring access to systems that had been locked for hours. It was delicate work, surgical in its precision, and when it was done, they both exhaled like survivors of a near drowning. "We need to document everything," Caleb said, pulling up the access logs that proved Arthur's involvement. Financial records, IP traces, the shadow admin account. All of it goes to the SEC and the board before he has a chance to spin this. Serafina nodded, already composing an email to the company's legal team. For a moment, it felt like they might actually win. Like the nightmare might finally be over. Then her phone rang. She answered, listened for 30 seconds, and her face went white. "Turn on the news," she said. The television in the server room was tuned to a financial network, but Caleb switched it to a local news channel. The image that greeted them made his stomach drop. A photograph, slightly grainy but unmistakably clear, showing Serafina and Caleb in the hospital waiting room. She was leaning over his shoulder, looking at the laptop, her face inches from his. The angle made it look intimate. The caption made it look worse. "Vance CEO in secret tryst with employee during company crisis." The story spread like wildfire. Within an hour, every tabloid and gossip site had picked it up, adding their own embellishments. Some claimed they had been having an affair for months. Others suggested Caleb was the reason for her recent divorce. A few enterprising reporters had already staked out his apartment building, capturing footage of Serafina's earlier visit, the one where she had shown up soaking wet at 6 in the morning. The optics were devastating. A CEO caught in an apparent affair while her company burned. A single father abandoning his sick daughter to rendezvous with his boss. The truth didn't matter. The narrative had already been written. By evening, the board had called an emergency session, not to discuss the sabotage or the merger or the evidence against Arthur, but to vote on Serafina's removal. The scandal had given them the excuse they needed. Moral turpitude and conduct unbecoming were the phrases being thrown around, legal language designed to strip her of power without addressing the actual crisis. Serafina paced the server room like a caged animal, her composure finally cracking under the weight of the day. "This was planned," she said. "Arthur leaked those photos. He wanted this exact reaction." Caleb knew she was right. The timing was too perfect, the damage too precise. Arthur had been watching them, probably through the same monitoring scripts he had installed in the system. He had waited for the perfect moment to strike, and he had found it. "We have the evidence," Caleb said. "We can still prove what he did." Serafina laughed, a bitter sound that echoed off the server racks. "Evidence doesn't matter when you're already convicted in the court of public opinion. The board won't care about sabotage if they think I'm having an affair with a subordinate. They'll use this to bury everything." She stopped pacing and turned to face him. Her eyes were red-rimmed, exhausted, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "I have to cut you loose," she said. "Publicly. Completely. If I'm seen defending you, it confirms the affair narrative. If I distance myself, I might survive long enough to fight back." The words hit Caleb like a physical blow. After everything, the sleepless nights, the hospital vigil, the frantic work to save her company, she was throwing him to the wolves to save herself. "You're going to let Arthur win," he said. "I'm going to survive. There's a difference." She walked out of the server room without looking back, leaving Caleb alone with the humming servers and the evidence no one would ever see. Outside, the reporters were gathering, their cameras hungry for another piece of the story. His daughter was still in the hospital. His career was in ruins, and the woman he had just risked everything to help had abandoned him without a second thought. This, he realized, was what rock bottom felt like. Caleb sat in the server room for 17 minutes after Serafina left. The hum of the machines was the only sound, a mechanical heartbeat that didn't care about scandals or betrayals or the wreckage of human ambition. He thought about calling the hospital to check on Lily. He thought about walking out the back entrance and disappearing into the city, leaving Vance Technologies and all its poison behind. He thought about Elena, about the voicemail he still couldn't delete, about the life they had planned together before death made other arrangements. His phone buzzed. A text from Dr. Webb. "Lily awake, asking for you. Fever stable at 99.4. She's going to be okay." The words blurred through the moisture in his eyes. She was going to be okay. That was all that mattered. That was supposed to be all that mattered. But it wasn't, because somewhere in the building above him, Arthur Brennan was maneuvering to take control of a company he had sabotaged. Somewhere, board members were preparing to vote based on lies and manufactured scandal. Somewhere, the truth was being buried under layers of optics and narrative, and if Caleb walked away now, it would stay buried forever. He pulled up the evidence files on the server console. Financial records showing Arthur had siphoned $3.2 million through shell companies over the past 18 months. IP logs tracing the sabotage directly to Arthur's personal devices. Email threads discussing the leadership transition that would follow Serafina's removal. It was all there, comprehensive, damning, undeniable. But evidence meant nothing if no one saw it. The board wouldn't listen to him. The media had already decided he was the villain. And Serafina, the one person who could have vouched for his credibility, had chosen survival over solidarity. Caleb thought about his options. He could send the files to a journalist, let the story unfold through the press. But that would take days, maybe weeks, and by then, Arthur would have consolidated power and buried the trail. He could go to the police, but corporate sabotage was notoriously difficult to prosecute, and Arthur had lawyers who specialized in making problems disappear. Or he could do something insane, something that would either save everything or destroy what little he had left. He could walk into the boardroom himself. The idea was absurd. He wasn't an executive. He wasn't even an employee anymore. His resignation was still technically valid. The board had no obligation to hear him, and every reason to have him removed by security the moment he showed his face. But the board meeting was happening in 45 minutes, and it was the only venue where all the decision-makers would be gathered in one place. If he could get in, if he could present the evidence before they voted, if he could make them understand that they were about to hand the company to the man who had tried to destroy it. It was a terrible plan. It was also the only plan he had. Caleb copied the evidence files to a secure drive and slipped it into his pocket. He straightened his wrinkled shirt, ran his fingers through his unwashed hair, and took one last look at the server room that had been his second home for the past 3 years. Then he walked out, past the security desk, where the guard barely glanced up, through the lobby where employees whispered and pointed, and into the elevator that would take him to the executive floor. The doors closed behind him. The numbers climbed. Somewhere above, a room full of powerful people was preparing to make a decision that would affect thousands of lives. They didn't know he was coming. They didn't know what he carried. They didn't know that the quiet engineer they had overlooked for years was about to become the most dangerous person in the building. Caleb watched the floors tick by and thought about Lily, about her small hand in his, about the promise he had made to always protect her. This was protection. This was the only way to ensure that her father wouldn't spend the next 10 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. This was survival. The elevator stopped. The doors opened, and Caleb stepped into the fire. The boardroom was a cathedral of glass and mahogany, designed to intimidate anyone who entered without an invitation. 14 people sat around the oval table, board members, legal counsel, a handful of senior executives. Arthur Brennan occupied the head position, looking perfectly composed in a charcoal suit that probably cost more than Caleb's monthly rent. Serafina sat at the opposite end, isolated, her face a mask of controlled fury. Caleb walked in without knocking. Every head turned. Someone called for security. Arthur half rose from his chair, his expression shifting from surprise to contempt. "This meeting is for board members only," Arthur said. "Someone escort this man out." Caleb kept walking until he reached the presentation screen at the front of the room. He plugged his secure drive into the DisplayPort and turned to face the assembled executives. "My name is Caleb Mitchell. Until yesterday, I was the lead systems architect for this company. I built the security infrastructure that protects every piece of intellectual property Vance Technologies owns. And I have evidence that your CFO has been systematically sabotaging that infrastructure to engineer a hostile takeover." The room erupted. Board members shouted questions. Arthur demanded that security be called immediately. A gray-haired woman Caleb recognized as the board chair banged her fist on the table for order. "You have 60 seconds, the chair said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Make them count." Caleb pulled up the first file. Financial records appeared on the screen. Wire transfers, shell company registrations, a paper trail that led directly to Arthur's personal accounts. $3.2 million embezzled over 18 months. The money was used to fund a parallel operation designed to destabilize company systems at the most critical moment of the merger. He clicked to the next file. IP logs, access records, timestamps that corresponded exactly with the security breach that had locked everyone out of the system. These logs show that Arthur created a shadow admin account using a backdoor vulnerability. He changed my encryption key, installed a logic bomb that would have destroyed our entire codebase, and set me up to take the blame. Another click. Email threads between Arthur and 2 board members discussing the transition plan that would follow Serafina's removal. This was never about the scandal. The photographs were a distraction, a way to give you an excuse to vote her out while the real crime went unnoticed. Arthur stood up, his face flushed with anger. "This is ridiculous. He's a disgruntled employee who resigned in the middle of a crisis. Everything he's showing you could be fabricated." The boardroom door opened. 2 men in dark suits walked in, followed by a woman Caleb had called from the elevator. SEC investigators. He had contacted them during the 17 minutes he spent sitting in the server room, sending them a preview of the evidence and requesting emergency intervention. They had arrived faster than he expected. "Arthur Brennan," the lead investigator said. "We have questions regarding potential securities fraud and corporate sabotage. You can answer them here, or you can answer them at our offices. Your choice." The color drained from Arthur's face. He looked around the room for allies, for escape routes, for anyone who might intervene on his behalf. But the board members were already distancing themselves, their expressions shifting from confusion to calculation as they realized which way the wind was blowing. "I want my lawyer," Arthur said. "That can be arranged." They escorted him out of the boardroom, past the executives he had schemed to control, past the company he had tried to steal. The door closed behind them with a sound like a verdict. The board chair turned to Serafina. "It appears we owe you an apology, Ms. Drake, and perhaps a reconsideration of the vote we were about to take." Serafina nodded, but her eyes were on Caleb. Something passed between them. Not gratitude exactly, but acknowledgement. Recognition of what he had risked and what it had cost. Later, after the investigators had taken their statements, and the board had unanimously voted to retain Serafina as CEO, she found Caleb in the hallway outside the boardroom. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I cut you loose. I left you to burn." Caleb shrugged. "You did what you thought you had to do. So did I. What do you want? Your job back? A promotion? Name it." He thought about the question, about the life he had been living and the life he wanted, about Lily still waiting for him at the hospital, about all the moments he had missed and all the moments he still had left. "I want to work from home 3 days a week," he said. "I want to leave at 5 o'clock on the days I'm in the office. I want to never miss another school play or parent-teacher conference, and I want it in writing." Serafina studied him for a long moment. Then she extended her hand. "Deal." 6 months later, the apartment didn't feel so small anymore. Caleb had repainted Lily's room in the spring, a soft lavender that she had picked out herself after 3 trips to the hardware store, and a very serious debate about the merits of purple versus pink. The walls were covered with her drawings now, crayon landscapes and stick figure families, and one surprisingly detailed portrait of their neighbor's cat. She had started calling the cat Mr. Whiskers, even though its actual name was something entirely different, and she visited it every afternoon after school. The merger had closed successfully, 2 months after the boardroom confrontation. Vance Technologies absorbed its European competitor, doubled its market valuation, and emerged from the crisis stronger than anyone had expected. Arthur Brennan pleaded guilty to securities fraud and embezzlement. The last Caleb heard, he was serving 4 to 7 years at a minimum security facility in Connecticut. Serafina remained CEO, though something had shifted in the way she led. The company still demanded excellence, still pushed for innovation, still expected results. But the late-night emails had stopped. The weekend calls had become rare. She had instituted a flexible work policy that allowed parents to adjust their schedules around their children's needs, and rumor had it, she had started leaving the office by 7 most evenings. They never talked about what happened in the hospital waiting room, or the photographs, or the night she showed up on his doorstep soaking wet. That chapter belonged to a different version of themselves, a version that had burned away in the fire of the crisis and emerged as something new. Caleb worked from home on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. He picked Lily up from school on those days, helped her with homework at the kitchen table, and cooked dinner while she told him about her friends and her teachers and the intricate social dynamics of first grade. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, he went to the office, but he left at 5 o'clock sharp, no exceptions. His colleagues had learned not to schedule meetings after 4:30. Elena's photograph still sat on his nightstand, but he had moved it slightly, not hidden, just repositioned, making room for a new frame that held a picture from Lily's 7th birthday party. She was grinning in the photo, her face smeared with chocolate frosting, surrounded by friends who had stayed until well past bedtime. It had been the first birthday party he hadn't missed since she was born. Some nights, he still talked to Elena in his head. He told her about Lily's progress in reading, about the promotion he had turned down because it would have meant more travel, about the small victories and quiet moments that made up a life. He liked to think she could hear him, somewhere, somehow. But even if she couldn't, the talking helped. It reminded him of who he used to be and who he was becoming. One evening in late autumn, Lily asked him why he didn't work as much as he used to. They were sitting on the couch, watching a movie about a princess and a dragon, her head resting against his shoulder. Caleb thought about the question, about the answer that would make sense to a 7-year-old, about the truth that had taken him 2 years and 1 terrible night to understand. "Because you're more important," he said finally. "You're more important than any job, any meeting, any amount of money. And I forgot that for a while. But I remember now." Lily considered this with the seriousness of a philosopher evaluating a complex theorem. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and turned back to the movie. Outside, the city hummed with its usual chaos, traffic and sirens and the endless machinery of ambition. But inside the small apartment with the thin walls and the lavender bedroom, a father and daughter sat together in the fading light, watching a princess slay a dragon. Some battles, Caleb had learned, were worth more than victory. Some battles were worth everything.